So hello and welcome to this JVSG listening session to discuss Grant Officers Memo 0326. So I am Beck Hayden. I'm the National JVSG lead for Department of Labor Vets. And before I start, I just want to let you know that the session is being recorded. Okay, so you have to click on a button in order to authorize your being on camera or being off mute. So that just be aware if you come off mute that you'll have to take that extra step. So this recording will be available on VET's YouTube. And I shared the link to that location with you in the meeting invitation. So you don't need to wait for me to send something out after the call. Just kind of check VET's YouTube and it should be up within the next few days. The recording should be up within the next few days. At some point after the call, I'll also share any questions and answers document as well as the meeting slides with you. It could take me a week or so to share those out with you. But speaking of questions and answers, your questions are the highlight of today's call. I only have a few slides. I think there's 16, and most of our time together today will consist of your questions and me trying to address them. We do prefer raised hands so that you can ask your question out loud. But if that's not an option for you, then just go ahead and put them in the chat. So with that being said, other things, we can't allow the use of AI. If there is a bot in the meeting, then those will be ejected. And if your mic is hot and it doesn't appear that was your intention, then our folks will be going through and just muting you individually as needed. So it's important to understand that there are two legal authorities for that authorize the services to certain participants. So our main authority is in statute. It's at 38 U.S. Code, Chapter 41, and those are eligible veterans, eligible persons, and those are standing. Like those don't change unless the statute change, which would be a huge deal. Any eligible veteran or eligible person must also be experiencing an employment barrier that's listed in our VPL 0524. The other legal authority for serving JVSG participants is in the Annual Appropriations Act. So you may know that every year Congress passes and the president signs a bill that allows agencies to spend funding or to spend money and to issue your grant awards. Congress can write in specific authorizations just for that are only applicable to that year's funding. All right, so we call those additional populations here in VETS, just because it allows for that distinction between those authorized through statute and through the Appropriations Act. So Congress has that opportunity every year to adjust the additional populations, but they have not changed it since 2014 until this year. In the Consolidated Appropriations Act for 2026, they kept the 3 existing additional populations, but then they added 2. And it is worth noting that our additional populations do not need to be experiencing an employment barrier. However, everyone before they are admitted into the JVSG program must attest that they're interested in receiving at least one individualized career services, and that's because of the statutory role of a DVOP. About these additional populations, the ones that have been in our Appropriations Act for 12 years, those haven't changed. They're still in the Act, and specifically they are transitioning service members who are within 1 year of separation from the military or 2 years of retirement and have participated in any part of the transition assistance program. Another of the additional populations are our wounded, ill, or injured service members who are receiving care at a military treatment facility. And then the third population is the spouses or other family caregivers of those wounded, ill, or injured service members. In the appropriation for this year, we had 2 new populations added. One of these was the surviving spouses of individuals who died while serving as members of the armed forces. And the other new population is the surviving spouses of individuals who died as a result of a service-connected disability. We issued Grant Officers Memo 0326 just last month to notify you of these 2 new additional populations. All right, so there's no specific guidance in the memo other than to notify you formally that you're able to serve these using FY26 grant funding, and to give you some context and definitions around this. Now, in our Annual Appropriations Act that specified these new populations can be served, it did not make that change retroactive to previous years. So if your state is still spending carry-in funds from previous years, you would not be able to use those funds to serve these new additional populations. The Grant Officer's Memo is very short. I think it's a page and a half or a couple of pages. But it has a few pages of an appendix at the end of it. And that's just completely in question and answer format. It was where we anticipated the questions you might have about the new additional populations and tried to answer those pretty clearly. We will go into not necessarily that appendix itself today, but we'll go into the specifics with you in this slide presentation, and then hopefully answer any additional questions you might have at the end of it. The first thing we want to do is dive into what the definitions that are applicable to these new surviving spouse additional populations. We'll get into the surviving spouse of these service member who died while serving as members of the armed forces first. You might know that there are a few different definitions in law of the term armed forces. There is a definition in Title 10 U.S. Code that is different from the one that we are using. Okay, so since JVSG is authorized under Title 38 U.S. Code, and since Title 38 has its own specific definition of armed forces, this is the one we're using, the one in Title 38. Interestingly, the Title 38 definition of armed forces, it does include reserve components. The reserves as well as the National Guard are all incorporated in that definition of armed forces. We also noticed that in the Appropriations Act, no specific cause of death was mentioned, and this means that we are not setting any limitations around the cause of death. The service member does not need to have died while on duty, or even while assigned to a duty station. So, for example, a National Guard member, they're in their normal daily life. They're not on drill. They're not assigned anywhere. They're just, carrying on, and they don't need to have died while on drill, for example, in order for their surviving spouse to receive services from JVSG. The question that I have gotten a couple of times since the memo came out is the surviving spouse still eligible after they later remarry? And yes, the answer is yes. As long as they were married to that service member at the time of death, their eligibility for JVSG services continues. However, they do need to affirm that they're interested in receiving at least one individualized career services. Again, this is because that is a DevOps job. The reason for having DevOps is to provide individualized career services to those who are eligible and in need of them. And next up, we'll get into the other new additional population definitions. All right, so this one is surviving spouses of individuals who died as a result of a service-connected disability. And so that person who died would be a veteran, and they would be a veteran who had a service rating from the Department of Veterans Affairs. It doesn't need to be total and permanent or anything like that. They just need to have died at least in some part as a result of that disability. We looked in our regulations and found kind of a thorough discussion of what constitutes as a result of the service-connected disability. So all of your fine details on that point will be there. Vets doesn't own this regulation, and we don't want to get into setting limits around that or trying to interpret what those regulations mean. We think if you read that section of the law, then you'll be able to answer any issues that come up. Now, this particular group was already being served. It was already eligible for services through JVSG. They were part of the eligible person cohort. So in definition for eligible person, there are several different types of eligible persons shown there. And this group was one of those group. So they remain eligible for services as long as they're interested in receiving at least one individualized career service. And this particular group of eligible persons would not need to also be experiencing an employment barrier because as you recall, none of our additional populations are subject to that requirement. So when any one thing changes in JVSG, naturally there are impacts in several other parts of the program. So this is where we'll get into that just a little bit. So I did indicate before that this change was not retroactive to your carry-in funding. These new additional populations, if they're served as additional populations, you would only be able to charge FY26 grant funding for the time spent delivering those services. If you're still spending your FY25 grant, or even some of you are still spending FY24, then that staff time can't be used to serve these groups. And the one exception to that is for the groups that the piece of it that you were already serving, the eligible persons, the ones the surviving spouse of someone who died as a result of their service-connected disability. Those, of course, they were already eligible under the statute, and so there's no need to kind of separate out what funds you're charging for those services. Now, all of our states are currently in the middle of doing your midpoint modifications of your JVSG state plans. In JVSG state plans, your state lists who will be served by the JVSG program in your state. And so your initial drafts were due, I think, in March, and we don't we do not expect states to modify your plans again in the middle of this whole process to include these two additional populations. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is just simply practicality. Changing your state plan is a big deal. We know that these go through a lot of levels of review and approval, both on your side and within on the federal side. We don't want to make you jump through those kinds of hoops. But also, we don't anticipate that this change, that these two new additional populations will significantly impact the way that you're delivering services in your state. We don't think that there will be so many more new eligible participants that it would cause you to need to change your state plan. So just keep in mind when it's time for your new 4-year state plan that'll be due in about 2 years from now, we will expect to see the newly eligible populations added in at that point. But at this point, if you're involved in the state plan process for your state, don't worry about these two new additional populations. You certainly can add them in if that's what your state wants, but it should not delay the state plan process, and is not required on our end. We never just issue guidance and leave you hanging. We like to make sure that everyone understands what the new guidance is about and just all of the implications. So as one next step for releasing Grant Officer Memo 0326, you're at it. Right here, we're having our JVSG listening session, as we always try to do whenever we issue a new policy that affects you. But beyond this, know that we are planning to hold a breakout session at the NASWA Annual Veterans Conference in Washington, D.C., the week of July 8th. It's July 8th through 10th. So if you're going to attend that conference, know that there'll be a certain point in the program where you can choose between several different optional breakout sessions, and I hope you choose ours if you want to discuss this topic a little bit more. We also want to update VPL 0524 to incorporate these new additional populations. We don't like having you go to 2 or 3 or 6 different policies to find out, everyone who's eligible under a JVSG. So we will update 0524, but don't look for that within the next year. So it does take us quite a bit of time to issue policies like that. Eligibility is addressed in many of our courses that are offered through the National Veterans Training Institute, or NVTI. We will be updating all the courses as it comes up to ensure that these new additional populations are included there. VETS and NVTI worked together a couple of years ago to create a screening tool, a DBOP eligibility screening tool, as well as a eligibility flowchart and a microlearning to go over that screening tool. So we are already well underway with making the updates to those 3 components. I don't know when they will go live, but it is imminent. We've already approved the changes. It's just a matter of making sure everything is 508 compliant and uploaded to the website. And then that was it from me, folks. I promised you lots of time for Q&A, and here we are. So if you have a question related to these additional populations or even eligibility in general, you may raise your hand at this point and we'll go over that. In the meantime, I'll check the chat to see if anyone placed a question there. I see lots of you have introduced yourselves, so thank you and welcome. All right, Lilibeth, you've got your hand up. Please unmute and share your question.
Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, my question is, for the spouses, whose husband or wife are MIA or POW status, do the JVSG service them as well, or
Okay,
the net
that's
status?
thank you for your
Would
question. So you're asking specifically about eligible persons
right?
whose spouse has been listed as MIA or POW for a period of 90 days at least and is still in that status. So that question, I've pulled up 0524 here because I figured it would come up at some point during this discussion. So I will go to our appendix on that so that I don't make stuff up when I don't have to. All right, an eligible veteran is here. We've got eligible person here. So you're talking about this group that I've highlighted on the screen. It's the spouse of any member of the armed forces serving on active duty who at the time for application, as in when they come in for services, they are currently listed as MIA, captured in the line of duty by a hostile force, or forcibly detained or interned in the line of duty by a foreign government or power. So you those eligible persons continue to be qualified for services from a DVOP as long as they are interested in receiving at least one individualized career service and they are experiencing at least one of our the employment barriers that are listed in this VPL. Lilibeth, if that doesn't answer your question, do let us know. Did you have a follow-up, Lilibeth, before we get to Michelle?
Yes, and I think you mentioned that. I just wanted to verify. So, as long as they attest, um, we can service them, right? And they agree to the intensive career services. That we don't need to get any verification documentation. Is that correct?
That is correct. JVSG does not require documentation or proof of eligibility. We only require self-attestation. And the reason for this is these are staff-assisted services. So that's the standard for staff-assisted services in DOL. We don't need verification unless you're spending money on the person, as in giving them, training, like spending training dollars on them or something like that, which JVSG does not do. So thank you for your question, Lilibeth. Appreciate that. And Michelle, can we get your question?
Hi, Beck. Just a question about GSOL. Have you been in contact with them to update these additional populations, or is that something we have to do on our end?
It is. So VETS doesn't reach out to your vendors to work with them on these changes, but we are here for technical assistance if they reach out to us. And Alex, you've got your hand up. I'm gonna bet that you've already started talking with them. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. If you can hear me, I reached out to GSL,
Yes.
started a trouble ticket, and they meet with me later this week so we could start those conversations because there'll, be a lot of states that are affected.
Yes. Yeah, I understand that 30 of our states use GeoSol for their JVSG program. So thanks for reaching out to them. In the meantime, I just want to reassure everyone that there is no urgency in making those updates in your systems. We know it takes time for those updates to come through. And in the meantime, the system as is won't be allowing through participants who aren't eligible. That's our primary concern. It may screen out participants or customers who are eligible, but that can be monitored, at a later point. So if it does turn out that someone was screened out or would be screened out by your MIS, but is in fact eligible under the new additional populations, you can indicate that in your case notes, the authority to serve that individual was described in GO Memo 0326. So I hope that helps. All right, so Brandon gave us an update. Brandon, the NVTI lead on our team, he said NVTI is targeting June to release the DVOP eligibility tool and microlearning. And he gave you a link on how to sign up for updates on that. So June is just, it's next month. So as usual, NVTI has turned this around rather quickly, or will have turned it around rather quickly, since this grant officer memo only came out last month. Okay, Joshua put a lengthy something in chat. So I'm going to read that aloud because, when people listen to the recording, the chats aren't on the recording. So I want to make sure and read out your chats so that those do get captured in the recording. So Joshua says, these updates are excellent and should improve our outreach to new and eligible individuals. A significant challenge we face is that very few people outside the veteran community are aware of our services. What strategy can we implement to advertise more effectively, and what types of funding might be available for community outreach? While I do my best to promote our services through word of mouth, foot traffic has been slow at times. Is there any possibility for the DOL in the future to provide funding for JVSG advertising and promotional materials? Joshua, thank you for that very important question about outreach and marketing for the JVSG program. It's quite a way off topic from what we're talking about here today, but I never pass over an opportunity to talk about this. So it's important to remember that JVSG funds, per our statute, JVSG funds are to be used exclusively for the salaries and benefits of JVSG funded staff and for their reasonable expenses, such as before we had a separate contract for NVTI, such as training and other business expenses for those staff. JVSG does not provide funding for outreach or marketing materials. And there may be some limited circumstances where such an expense would be reasonable. However, we do not want DVOPs going out into the public and outreaching directly to individuals where it is not the responsibility of the JVSG program, meaning vets or specifically JVSG staff or recipients, to use JVSG funds for finding new participants to serve. You're here to serve participants, not to find participants to serve. One great reason for this is that it's already covered under WIOA through your other grants, your other DOL funded grants. You're able to market to the public, or not market, but outreach to the public to let them know about the important services that are available through the AJCs. And the messaging should always be, go to the AJC for employment services. There is no need to market JVSG specifically. This is because you don't want to put out information to the general public or even to the veteran-specific public that they should come into an AJC and ask for the DVOP. All customers need to be screened at the AJC level or by the MIS to make sure that they're eligible for and interested in receiving those individualized career services from a DVOP. We would not want someone to see an advertisement or see a pamphlet or something and think, oh, I'm a veteran, I'm gonna go ask this DVOP, for help. No, because we would not want to put a DVOP in a situation where someone's contacting them directly who hasn't been screened, because as a DVOP, what are you going to have to tell that person? You're going to have to tell them, I can't help you, maybe in different words, but I'm I'm not the one who can help you. I need you to go online and register. I need you to talk to the staff at the front desk, and they'll make sure that you're to get you to the programs that you're eligible for and that would meet your needs. So this is why outreaching is a bit of a sore point in vets, because we know that you're excited about serving participants. We know that you're excited about serving veterans, and we hate to put you in a position where you're going to have to tell someone that, you know, they have to go through some other hoops before you can work with them. So that may be a little bit of a lengthy answer to your questions, Joshua, but if it didn't fully hit on all your points, I hope you'll raise your hand and unmute so we can discuss it a bit further. Reading down the list in the chat, I see David has said Lever should educate AJC staff of the new additional populations for proper screening purposes. Whether that's done by a Lever or other resources such as NVTI, as long as, yes, your AJC staff should be notified of these new individuals who can be served. Mark, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, I previously put a question in the chat, and I'm not sure if I missed your response.
Oh, there it is. Right, go ahead. And what was your question? Say it out loud for us.
My question was, will the 0524 updates include the new JVSG 0, 1, 2, and 3 acronyms? And the reason why I asked that is because we do our training with our Career Center staff using our regs and policies. And currently, none of our regs and policies has this new JVSG acronym identifier ending.
Thanks for your question, Mark. So safe to assume you're a GeoSol user?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. It's important to remember that not all states use GeoSol. So about 30 of you do, and then the rest use AJLA, or they use a homegrown system. So vets can't put in our policy something that's specific to a vendor that some states use. It doesn't, it wouldn't make sense. We have to write policy that's good for every state. We can't single you out based on a vendor that you use. So I hope that helps. But to answer your question briefly, no. When we update VPL 0524, we will not be including vendor-specific codes. So sorry.
Thank you.
That's good question, but that's going to be on you and on GeoSol to address within your states. All right, we've got Monique answered, outreach to centers of influence is okay though, correct? Just not outreach to individuals. I don't know what centers of influence means, but yeah, to clarify what I mean about appropriate outreach that DevOps could be conducting, we understand that when DevOps network with other local service providers, it helps participants because the DevOps knows better about what that service provider has available, so they know which of their customers would best benefit from those services. And then also it helps that service provider know about the programs available through the American Job Centers, like a Veterans Assistance Center. Yes, it sounds like you've got the right concept in mind, Monique. So thank you for that clarification. DevOps outreaching to other local service providers in the area does make a lot of sense. Although just remembering that's not a primary duty of their job. Their duty is to provide individualized career services to those who are eligible. But to the extent that that service is aided by networking with local providers, it does make sense. Right? Patrick asked, when a veteran can't remember his service discharge, do we just assume the veteran has an honorable until notified otherwise? That would be a tricky one, Patrick. We need the customer to certify or to self-attest as to their eligibility. There's no box for I don't know. We need them to attest that they did not have a dishonorable discharge. Thanks for that question. I've never heard that one before. I'm not seeing any more questions in chat or hands up. So, you know, this is kind of your last chance to speak up and ask any JVSG eligibility questions, or if needed, we can, you know, go off into other JVSG topics. I'm happy to help you. But if there are no other questions, then we'll call it a day. And I just want to thank you again for your participation today, for your questions, for showing up to these events so that I can keep talking with you and clarifying the important fine points of JVSG. There's a lot to remember. All right. We'll call it then.